Welcome to the Operation Paragon podcast. I'm your host, Gabe Schickler, and today we are talking about what it really means to accuse someone of being prideful, why you should never do it, the effect it has on your life, and one of the more helpful rules that I have found for my personal mindset. So this is the first Soapbox episode that we're doing, and basically what this means is it is me and a microphone, and I will be talking about, some personal experience I've had, something I've learned, something we can all take away, hopefully something you guys can use in your lives to maybe shortcut that process of getting to the next level, and then I'll detail at the end, obviously I'd love to get your feedback on what works, what doesn't, everything like that. So, let's get right into it. The first question that we really have to ask with that sort of title is pride wrong? And the answer is yes, and the answer is also no. This is very annoying. If you've spent any time with any sort of philosophical or theological education, something that's probably come up a lot that you've heard is we will use different words to describe happiness or love because different languages, usually, Greek or Latin, have different words that mean something that's much more precise than just saying, I'm feeling happy or I'm feeling I love this, right? You can say you love a person, you can say you love food. And so there's more precise ways to address both of those. The problem with pride is that, on the one hand, you don't want to be prideful in that you have a disordered understanding of yourself. You think you're just leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else. And, like the Homer Simpson boy, everyone is stupid except me, everything like that. You definitely don't want to have that. But at the same time, there are definitely times in your life when you should be proud of yourself. And we use that same word to mean the healthy sort of pride where you're taking joy in your accomplishments and your achievements and the things that you've done well and rightly. But then we also use the same word to describe destructive pride, right? And so we don't really have a distinction between the two of those. And something that's very important to recognize with this as well is that humility is a strictly Christian concept. Like the idea of this did not exist before Christianity, where, we believe that God lowered himself to, the state of humanity, right? Taking on the form of, a slave, coming in human likeness, giving himself up to death, even death on a cross, right? That level of humility is just unprecedented in the rest of human history. If you look at something like the epics of the ancient Greeks, so this would be things like the Odyssey, the Iliad, even the Aeneid, which, of course was written by Virgil, who was a Roman. In all these things, one of the things that they really emphasize is the importance of personal glory and grandeur, right? So we have to remember that this idea of humility is not really something that comes naturally to many people, right? It's a skill that has to be developed. And it's not self-abasement, right? It's recognizing your place in the order of the universe and then understanding that you are where you are specifically because God gave you the opportunities to become that way, and you chose to, right? You cooperate with that. So it's understanding that you have accomplished things, but it's not exclusively by your own power, if that makes sense. And if we just look at a practical example of this, a general doesn't serve his men by falsely insisting that, I'm not worthy to lead you guys, I'm just like the rest of you, because no, his entire job is built around the fact that he is not like the rest of these guys, and he is in a position of authority to issue orders. And obviously, if you had a military without any rank or formal leadership structure, that would just be a mob, basically. And it would never accomplish anything and probably get slaughtered the second it stepped foot on the battlefield. So it's not pride for that general to assert his position of dominance and really emphasize that. And we would, understand now that the best way for him to do that is in the sense of servant leadership. So he's not doing it for his own glory or his own satisfaction or anything like that. He's doing it specifically in order to achieve an end, right? So he is acting with humility, but still in a position where people would be like, he's so prideful, and so on. And this is one of the most common criticisms that I hear of high performers. And it really bothers me because people will just be like, so-and-so, he's just so prideful. I can't stand that guy. And this is just it's a weak reaction, low energy reaction, because people who have achieved great success in their primary focus, whether that's business, fitness, spirituality, education, any of these different areas, relationships, they've built up their confidence because they've stacked so many wins that they've given themselves so much evidence that I am enough, I am competent, I am capable, and I can do this. And so they have a level of presence and force of will that's supported by that confidence that intimidates a lot of people that don't have those same track records as a result. And so this self-confidence and reliance on themselves makes them less reliant on the opinions of others, and so usually this results in one of two things. Either you will feel slighted because the person offends you because they're farther ahead of you, or so basically you're feeling jealous, or you're just offended by them because you think they're brash and abrasive or something like that. And so this results in people having an inherent dislike of people that exhibit that high level of confidence and self-belief. And the problem with this is that calling someone prideful is a nice, non-specific, loosely defined umbrella term that's very difficult to measure. And what it does is it communicates that you believe someone lower on the totem pole, so lower in the hierarchy, believe that they are actually better than the person in question, and it justifies them in not having made an attempt to get to that point. Because if you say, well, I could get super rich, I could get super jacked, but I don't want to become prideful because that would be bad. And so I'm just going to stay where I am, less than my potential could be, but I'm not being prideful. So that's actually a very good and a very noble self-sacrificial thing to do. And people like to just coddle their egos like this and convince themselves that their lack of effort is actually a good thing and they don't have anything to prove to these people. And yeah, it's true, you don't have anything necessarily to prove to those people, but you have something to prove to yourself, you have something to prove to God. You should take advantage of the different opportunities that He's given you. And then if you have a family, you also have an obligation to those people, right? We would all recognize that if a man gets married and starts a family and he's an absolute bum and does nothing to contribute to the household, bring in income, we would consider him pretty pathetic. But for some reason, people, well, we know why, they like to justify that as being something that's actually good. And nothing could be farther from the truth. And the really funny thing about this is it's actually, when you think about it, very obviously false humility. Because someone saying, oh, well, I'm not like those other people that are super successful. I'm better than them. And it's that comparison game that they're playing in their heads. So there are a lot of examples of this that you can see. Typically, it's in the business world because financial stability, abundance is one of the easiest metrics that we have for success, especially in the modern world. So if you look at people that are very commonly accused of being prideful, you get Sean Whalen, Andrew Tate, Andy Frisella, Grant Cardone, people like these guys, extremely high performers, extremely aggressive, very outspoken, and so they tend to ruffle a lot of feathers. The thing is, if you have a problem with any of these individuals, point to the actual issue and not just some pathetic cope of like, oh, well, he's prideful. So, for example, if we take Andrew Tate, I have huge issues with the fact that he built his empire and his wealth on a pornography business, because that is disgusting, indefensible, and so on, right? Because it's just an inherently evil industry. So that is an example where I'm not going after him because I think he's like this loosely defined pride thing. There's a specific difference that I have with him, and I say that life is not for me and I do not want that. But most people aren't willing to say that they don't want that because deep down they do, and they don't like the challenge and the reminder that they're not measuring up to that, if that makes sense. So if there isn't an easily definable problem, the issue is your ego. Step one is to muster the humility to admit that you're not as good as these people in some area, and then decide if you honestly want to compete with them at that level. And if not, shut up, right? I had a friend a week or so ago who really does not like Grant Cardone. I've read a couple of his books. I think he definitely teaches a lot of good stuff. But again, he's very outspoken. He does, a lot of personal branding on social media, and so of course he's going to ruffle a lot of feathers that way. And this friend of mine sent me a little YouTube short in which Grant was talking about, if you aren't making $400K a year, you're basically failing your family, and I would be super embarrassed to be there. Two very important takeaways from this. The first is, you're not Grant. Maybe that is an acceptable standard to you, maybe that's not, maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower, but this friend of mine is currently making significantly less than $400K a year. And so part of me really has to wonder, is he angry at Grant, or would he even be angry at all if he didn't take that as a challenge and a reminder that he's not living up to his potential? Because there are many perfectly respectable careers, occupations, ways to live that will get you, 80 to 100K a year. And if you're happy with that, if you can raise your family with that, and not complacent happy, but truly, if that's what you feel you're called to do, if that's where you find fulfillment, then go for that. That's a wonderful way to live. But people are going to have different standards. And because, Grant Cardone is a billionaire, he is going to have a much higher standard than the rest of us. And so that is something else that's very important to consider. But at the end of the day, you don't want to hate on him for being prideful when he is just speaking what he believes. So, like I said, if there truly wasn't an issue, if you didn't perceive an issue, you wouldn't care. So I'm not jealous of astronauts, despite the fact that, they have achieved a lot more in certain areas than me, because I don't have much interest in going to space. And so it's like the idea of going to space, like maybe that's cool, but that's not something that's really a focus in my life. And so I don't really care as a consequence if people do. I'm not envious of them. I'm not like, oh, well, they're just doing that to prop themselves up. I'm like, cool, there are people in space, whatever. It doesn't really make much of a difference to me. So why should you specifically, not do this? We've discussed up to this point why it's usually a cope and a smokescreen for some sort of deeper issue or, a sting at the ego. But the reason that you specifically should not talk this way is not because it does anything to the people that you're hating on. In most of the cases, they just ignore it. Grant Cardone is pretty outspoken on social media, where he's constantly trolling his haters, posting about his jet and being like, oh, without my haters, it wouldn't be possible and all this stuff. I'm not a huge follower of Grant. I personally think that's pretty funny. But, anybody that's a high performer has trained their brain to just disregard other people's opinions. Because if you're in the top 1%, by definition, you're not the other 99, which means you can't afford to think and behave and listen to that 99%, in that area. But the reason that you shouldn't do this specifically is because it's actually because of the effect it has on you. It's self-sabotage. So when you denounce someone as prideful, what you're doing is you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because you're equating their success, whether they're a bodybuilder or a businessman or whatever, you're communicating to yourself that achieving that level of status will inevitably lead to that level of pride. And so you're communicating to God and to, the order of life in the universe that you don't want that result. And so what this means is you lump their success in with their perceived deficiencies. You tell your conscious and your subconscious mind that the achievement is bad. And then as a way to cope, you repeat that to yourself again and again and again until it's actually ingrained in your subconscious. And it becomes a way by which you start to live your life. So the result of this is you basically hamstring yourself whenever you start to seek that level, because you've created the belief that achieving that thing in itself is bad. And so you create this artificial ceiling that you'll just keep butting up against and not let yourself get past, because you don't believe that it's in any way morally justifiable to achieve that thing. And so you never will. And if you start to get too close, you'll start to tear yourself down. And I know, because I've done this personally in the past. So what if someone is actually prideful and not just confident? What if they actually have an inflated opinion of themselves that is unjustified? Let God sort that out, man. Pride is the worst of all sins. It's the first of all sins. It's the reason that humanity got screwed up in the first place. So your best bet is to just trust that God is going to sort things out in the end, and then just ignore those people. Because if you can't stand to spend time around someone, it's probably not a good idea for you to spend a lot of your energy and focus and attention on them. Just avoid them, seek out different surroundings, seek out different things. And it's okay if people's messages don't resonate with you. People are here for different reasons. Some people are going to be able to reach, a certain audience better than others, and there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you despise every single one of those 4 men I listed earlier. Okay, fine, that is your prerogative. You don't have to agree with anything that they say. You don't even have to agree with anything that I say, right? And you could make the argument, I am incredibly less qualified to demand that people listen to me in that way, right? Because I have an exponentially lesser track record of success. So, in all these things, just take things with a grain of salt, and if there's a belief or a mindset that you truly don't believe will serve you, just ignore it. We ignore so much of life every day. Our conscious mind only registers 5% of everything, and your subconscious stores the other 95%. And so just don't focus on the things you don't want to focus on or you feel like are destructive in your life. It's that simple. And something that's very important to remember as well is you don't need to mimic everything about a person to get value out of them. Just pick and choose what you want. So my family, in general, just despises Andrew Tate, probably because, they've listened to a bunch of talking heads that have told them to think so. I don't think they've actually consumed anything that he's directly put out. As I said earlier, I don't want Tate's business. I don't want a lot of things about his life. I think hookup culture is an absolute mistake, and that entire mindset and worldview is just going to lead you into a life of depression and despair and meaninglessness and constantly trying to, fill that hole with something that just won't do it. But if you're interested in branding and marketing, you would be an absolute fool not to pay attention to Tate in some capacity because he was one of the most Googled men on earth last year. And attention is the modern currency. So if that's something that's a priority of yours, you should be willing to learn from people that have mastered that area, even if they aren't great in others. If you want to learn public speaking, you would probably be very well served going out and finding the best speakers on the face of the earth. And if they differ with you on religion, politics, mindset, worldview, any of these things, that's fine because you're not coming to them for those things. You can take what you want and then just leave the rest and say, good for you. You can think the way you want. I don't agree with that, but thanks, I have appreciated our time together. And if your standard for life is that everybody must agree with you on everything, you are going to have an extremely, extremely, extremely small circle. And chances are it's going to be a very limited circle because those people don't actually agree with you on everything. They just don't want to rock the boat or say something offensive. And so they're not going to say what they actually mean or they actually believe. So all that is to say, don't filter your worldview through other people's opinions. You'll just end up with theirs if you try to make them perfectly happy. So trust your gut, go with what you think belief serves you, and just discard the rest. So I mentioned in the beginning my one rule for my mindset. It's very simple. I am not a hater. I don't hate on people above me because I want to level up and I don't want to slow down my progress. I don't hate on people below me because I don't believe in punching down. I think it's a waste of time. It's self-destructive. It creates a bad reputation. It's just generally for jackasses. And I don't hate on people that are at my level because you should be leveling up together, right? If there's something that I don't like about a person, I might make a criticism publicly or just privately be like, I don't agree with that. But that doesn't mean that I'm condemning the entirety of the person. I'm just disagreeing with certain aspects of their life or their choices or any one of these things. And that's really important because we need to be willing to give each other some grace. We're never going to agree on everything. And it's just a question of, how much are you willing to tolerate? How much are you not? That's going to have a different answer for different people. But the important thing at the end of the day is that it's going to look different. Your belief and your worldview is influenced by your experiences and your life, which is something that nobody else has the benefit of. And so no one is going to think exactly the same way that you do, and that's okay. But to denounce somebody as prideful just because they're ahead of you and you don't appreciate that reminder that you're not living up to your potential, that's a good thing. That's God's wake-up call trying to get you to step into who you could be and who you could become. And that's not something to turn your nose up at or try to ignore. That's something to embrace and be like, dang, I am capable of more. I can do more. And then to actually act in a better way as a result of that. So, in summary, maybe somebody does offend you. Either it's a challenge for you to get better or you should just disregard it outright. Nobody has a message that's meant for everyone, and it's okay to disagree with other people. Don't whine about people who make you realize that you are capable of more, and don't let that challenge bring down your energy. We can all make it if you just, put in the work, try to level up, find the mentors and the role models that you want, and unapologetically just go after trying to become and unlock that higher version of yourself. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Operation Paragon podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at Operation Paragon for more, and hit us up in the DMs or email operationparagonpodcast@gmail.com if you like the episode or have any other feedback. Never forget that you are called to greatness. It's up to you to make it happen, and it is within your reach.